Welcome back, I guess, to the show. It's not really a show. It's just a recording whenever I do one with a friend. This is my 10th level Paladin, and today I'm talking with Morgan Weeks, who's big to do on Earth Dawn, and he can introduce himself if he likes. We're going to talk about his character today. Morgan.
Greetings. I'm Morgan Weeks. I guess the character I'm going to be talking about his name is Marcus.
What game is Marcus from?
So tragically, this is a D&D 3.5 character from after the death of 3.5. So it doesn't even have the common decency to be a Pathfinder character. Because that group this isn't just about the character. This is about all the weird shit surrounding that and that group and the dynamics. We'll get into that. But yeah, they were very serious about their 3.5, which should give some hints as to what lays before us.
So before you tell me about Marcus, let's talk a little bit about 3.0 and 3.5 and sort of the mentality in the hobby that once a game isn't being supported anymore, we as a collective don't really respect that game anymore and we don't play it. What's going on there, in your opinion?
It's that there's no new material coming out. Effectively, it's a completed story. You know, it's finite. It's done.
Right.
And you can see that with, kind of works of fiction out there, and why it's hard to break into, in my opinion at least, running games in like the Star Wars universe, because there's already the stuff that's going on, and you can't really touch that unless you're willing to go, break some sacred cows or whatever.
Right. Well, you and I have talked about Star Wars probably for about 1,000 hours in the past. And I think it's a perfect example of that kind of thing where the canon is so wrapped up in three characters' lives that what do you tell? What do you say about it?
Yeah. And I agree, clearly. But for a game line that's dead, for some people it's really appealing because you can have it and it's complete and you have all the things for it. There's no new wrinkles or twists that are going to come out. But for most people, it's kind of the mystique is gone because you have it all, and there's no new shiny things. There's no new intriguing stuff that's going to come out. We're all goblins at the end of the day, wanting new things, whether it's clickety clackety math rocks or these awful GM-less games that get put out. Just endless churn of them, and you're like, oh Christ, I gotta support my friend in this new thing. And then you read it and you're like, Black Monk, man, more like Black Skunk.
Yeah,
but
I didn't realize you were going after me with that. I've been
I like to keep it personal.
Yeah. No, I hear you though. I mean, because I have made so many GM-less games that there's a certain point where you need to stop buying protocols, right? Because this one looks an awful lot like this one.
To be fair, your GM-less games are the only ones I do buy, and it's not just because you're my friend and I support my friends. It's they make great stocking stuffers,
and they're so cheap.
And they confuse the normies.
Yeah.
But in a very serious, Black Monk is some of my favorite gaming experiences just because it's so effing weird and I can't explain it to anyone who wasn't there.
Yeah.
Because it's very much in that moment with those people.
Yeah, well, that's always my hope with the GM-less games, certainly, that anybody makes, is that I've played the fiasco that's set around the assassination of Kennedy, Texas 1963, I think it's called, or Dallas 1963, I forget the name. I've played it 3 times, and we've never once addressed Kennedy at all.
Interesting.
We end up using it in completely different ways, and because Texas has its own sort of mythology to it, its own sort of canon, there's so much you can do with it that doesn't have to deal with Kennedy.
Other than don't mess with it.
Just yes, don't tread on me. Yeah. Absolutely.
So let's
talk about more. Go ahead.
My first protocol experience was the Climb of Icarus, I believe, with you.
Yeah. The Frozen Climb of Icarus. I just did a new cover for it. It's going to be coming out.
Which I don't think anyone expected that to go the way it did.
Yeah, I thought that
sideways.
was a great session.
Anyway.
Other than the fact that immediately Dan wanted to ruin from the jump, he wanted to ruin a character relationship without understanding that's something you build to.
That's true.
But yeah, that was a great session.
He wanted to turn us against each other. That's right.
Right.
Which,
and that's
it happened at the end, but
right, but for completely different reasons.
Yes.
And we built a better story out of it, I think. But I don't want to talk about protocol games. I want to talk about Marcus. Let's hear about Marcus and why he's your favorite character.
Oh, I wouldn't say he's my favorite character, but the stories around him are certainly the most entertaining, given the short amount of the time it spans. The background on this is I'd reconnected with a friend from years before, from an L5R LARP I ran, and decided to break out of my shell and make some new friends, which did work out for me in the end. So I really do have no regrets about the experience, despite the fact it was, well, you'll see. So the campaign was pitched as this heavily political city campaign with lots of intrigue in it, and in D&D 3.5. And so I was skeptical immediately, because D&D 3.5 doesn't scream political or intrigue. But you know what? You can do whatever you want with a game, and the mechanics and what it's typically about, a fantasy adventuring game, don't have to dictate what actually happens. Spoiler alert, it was a fantasy adventuring game, and that was all a dirty lie. So towards this end, I made a beguiler. And for people who aren't familiar with that, which I would expect is most everyone, it's not a third-party product. It's just one from the later life cycle of 3.5.
Right.
And they're full progression casters that specialize in illusion magic and being sneaky gits.
Yeah, they've got a little bit of rogue skill progression going on.
Yeah. So for the advertised political city game, I was like, this character is going to be a lot of fun. And since they're kind of outsiders from, the premise of the class, I wrote them up to be, it's like, okay, well, I want them someone who's looking for a family to really connect with and bond with over time. And that's going to be his character arc. And so I went the most cliched way I possibly could and made him an orphan.
Right, of course.
Right, and tried to tie him into some of the politics and what was going on. And in this setting that was very lived in, because the GM had been running it for probably longer than I'd been alive. And everyone except for me was very familiar with it. So I was the neophyte to this world,
right,
and did not get any of the references, which were made constantly. So that was a weird experience as an older geek, to be kind of an outsider looking in on, like, I want to say a year of inside jokes that I will never get. But anyway, so that was the background. I wrote up a decent background full of hooks for him to use. They were never used. So that was all just a bunch of, narcissistic work on my part that had no bearing on the events that unfolded. The other people at the table, there was 3 players played 3 goblins, one of which could have been, in the right hands, possibly the best version of Don Rickles from Kelly's Heroes the world has ever seen in a game.
Go on.
Another was a factotum played by a relentless power gamer.
A factotum goblin.
Yeah.
All right. I'm in. You already have me hooked. Go on.
There was also a human barbarian chain thing played by my friend. Whatever. There was a human cleric and a goblin ranger named Shadowgrub. And in real life, the cleric and the goblin ranger were a couple, and they're married. They have kids who were at the game session, which led to the dad who played the human cleric, like running off frequently to take care of them. And the goblin ranger's player, she's the GM's daughter, and the other character was a halfling rogue, played by the GM's wife. And I haven't seen a halfling rogue like that since I was in 8th grade. She would hide during the weirdest scenes. Like, we're going to meet some people, and she's like, well, I'm hiding under the desk. And my thought was, okay, sure. I didn't realize it, but in some way it showed her experience playing with her husband over decades, because he liked to ambush us randomly.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, which will become relevant again later on, but there was a lot of ambushes. My friend, so the seating arrangements, which is also weirdly relevant. I sat at one end of the table, GM sat the other. His wife was on his right, and then it was Walter and Rachel. Rachel being his daughter, she was next to me, and Katja was on the other side. She's my friend that was there. And then Andrew, one of the people in her poly group, and then Trevor, who was playing the Goblin Don Rickles. I don't remember his class. It doesn't matter. He wanted to make a deal. So that is the setup and the positioning of everyone as it starts. And I know one person.
Can we get just a little bit, sort of a little bit about what Marcus, from his perspective, thought of this camaraderie that he was sort of stuck with, so to speak?
Sure. So it started off, we were all brought in and hired to do a job as disparate people who'd never met each other before in classic fantasy adventuring tropes.
Yep.
I thought there's a lot of short, weird people with big noses here. Because there's like half the group is goblins.
Right.
You got 3 people, 3 out of 7 are goblins, and then you got a halfling. So I was like, okay, it's a bunch of weirdos. Let's roll. It's important to note when I was playing Marcus, he was neutral because I don't like to commit on alignments.
Right.
They're usually just used as some sort of punishment to you if someone feels you aren't following their arbitrary decision on what an alignment means.
Yeah. We could do 2 hours on alignment.
Yeah, so let's not. But I decided Marcus was never going to kill anyone in this game. Like, just not his style. Murdering, he's not a murderer. That's not how he rolls. So I purchased a whole bunch of manacles and had to live through all the jokes of what are you doing with those handcuffs? Oh, you're going to put some fuzzy stuff on those handcuffs. I was like, well, no, I'm going to take prisoners so we don't have to murder everyone. And I was quickly proven wrong when we just started straight up murdering everyone.
Right.
I'd cast sleep, and I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to go manacle this dude up on my next action, and then the halfling would go stab him in the throat. So, and I was the most evil person in the group at neutral.
All right.
So, so I was with a bunch of bloodthirsty psychopaths. But, looking for a home with that group.
Yeah, well, that's in and of itself. Let's remove everybody's sort of crazy murder hobo mentality from this. That's sort of a weird story to tell when you've written all this backstory and you want to find a family and the people you're with they're just all cartoons, right? They're caricatures of real people. And that makes the game experience a little surreal, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. So
I'm used to not being wrong. It's a good feeling.
And he's so humble.
So tell us maybe the biggest, most surprising event that happened at the table with Because
Well,
I think from the first session, it sounds like nothing is going to surprise you with this group. But
no. Well, so out of God, I hope no one who actually was in this game ever hears this.
I
So,
have 40 views per podcast, so you're probably pretty safe.
all right. Well, that's good news. Um, so it is the seating and relationships of the table superseded what was going in the game very frequently. For example, the GM had an unhealthy interest in my friend Katya, which was just weird because she's the same age as his daughter.
Oh boy. Oh man. All right.
Yeah, right. Weird stuff there. Also, while this was going on, she started developing a relationship with Trevor, the guy playing the Don Rickles Goblin, who got traded out for an infinitely inferior monk sword sage character. That was more, to be fair, more appropriate to the game we were actually playing, not the one that's advertised, and much more heavily min-maxed for combat. Katja was no longer allowed to sit next to me. She had to sit next between the two boys, Andrew and Trevor, as they became deeply jealous over each other and their weird poly relationship. So I was no longer allowed to interact with my friend because I was other boy who was a threat to their tenuous grasp or whatever. So that happened and was very strange to watch in slow motion. But consequently, I became friends with Rachel, who sat next to me, and her and Walter are, I count as very good friends to this day. So that's excellent. But even in character, Marcus, who I portrayed as being very much a kind of a fancy lad who enjoyed the finer things in life and didn't like to get dirty, because he spent his childhood poor and he wanted to have, the things he never could. But his best friend quickly became Shadowgrub, the dirty, filthy goblin, who would go up the boar the wrong way with a spear.
All right.
And because Shadowgrub's backstory is Shadowgrub's family was murdered by the villain we were chasing after, it turns out. So they both had this kind of shared sense of wanting a place to belong and finding it kind of with each other. The least likely pair of the group found the family they had lost and the family they were looking for in each other in this bizarre friendship. So that was kind of the biggest surprise for everyone as that relationship evolved in some genuinely good role playing, and until the end of the game when I left everyone in a stunned stupor, except for Rachel, who cackled loudly.
Before you tell us how many sessions do you think this went?
Oh, it went. I want to say it went for at least a year. Okay. We didn't get much XP, and we ended up at level 7.
Okay.
By the end of it, and that last level I had taken as a mind bender, which allowed me to get telepathy, and in turn, which gave me access to a feat that I could, basically I could never be surprised again.
Oh,
because I was so goddamn tired of being ambushed.
That makes sense. That's an interesting tree to create because your GM is a nonce.
Yeah. So they're in my notes, of which I took copious notes, including writing out my entire spell book and the effects of all the spells. So I really had an idea of everything I could do.
Right.
There was a point where I kind of decided I was done with taking the game seriously and just was going to figure out how to not just break the setting as best I could, but start conducting psychological warfare against other people at the table.
In and out of character, or just in character?
Oh, explicitly out of character through the game.
Love it.
Not to their characters, but to them through what was going on in the game.
Right.
And I started making plans to that effect.
I was at a LARP once at a convention, and Very quickly, the organizers had made it clear this is your first time playing with us, so you're fresh meat and you're not going to get to impact the story, which was the stupidest thing he could have said to me and some of the other people playing, because we proceeded to not take anything seriously and just try to ruin everybody's fun. Yeah, because why would you do that to a player? Tell them there's nothing you can do can impact this.
Yeah, you've marginalized someone who no longer has any impetus to play by your rules.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing. I'm really glad we're talking about some of this, because these are the kind of stories that are going into my GM advice book.
Okay, which I backed. Number 14.
It ends tomorrow, so I don't even know if people are going to hear this before then. But we really should have talked sooner, because these are the kind of things that I love to address. Look, if this is your idea of fun, you don't need this book. Continue what you're doing. But if anybody at the table has felt that their time was wasted or they've been marginalized by your game mastering in this context, you really need to read this and understand what's happening.
Yeah. So that is the stage for that I was kind of done with the game, though. Again, I did have formed a great relationship. I'm still friends with Katja, who I came in there with. Everyone else, not so much.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I used to play that Pulp game by White Wolf. Was it called Adventure?
It was.
The guy that ran it, we only showed up 3 times. We just couldn't take it anymore. The guy that ran it, his wife was one of the players. And you know how that goes. He's got to make sure that everything she does, she succeeds at. And she was essentially Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider series. And
my wife has none of those experiences in games like Rob.
No, are you really mean to her?
I'm not really mean to her. I just treat her like every other plebe at the table.
Which I think you're supposed to do. That's the whole point, right? You don't want to feel, you'd never want to feel that there's favoritism going on. Again, we're back to talking about advice from the book, but I think what I want out of this is I want one big event story thing that happened that shook the tree.
All right. Well, you're going to get that. So there was 2 villains we were chasing down, and it is important to note I did not actually kill anyone in the game, which is around this time people realized that Marcus had never once murdered anyone.
Right.
Never, and that was pretty important to him, is that he's not a killer, and that's how he sees himself. And it was not something he advertised, but he would regularly spend time with the street urchins and give them money and donate money to the church and the orphanages of the god he didn't worship or necessarily follow anyone. But there was the god that ran the orphanages, and he would donate tithe essentially to them for their good works.
Right.
And other players, it was kind of done low key, but other players had caught up on that because Marcus is doing some shady stuff. And to be fair, I did a lot of shady stuff. But some of that shady stuff was good works. I just wasn't advertising but anyway, so we finally get to the showdown, and I have a very strange bag of tricks as a beguiler at this point, including telepathy, and I'd collected some bizarre magic items that no one else wanted, because what would you possibly use those for? And because I have my thief skills, I developed like a bunch of medicine and had an intelligence that was, I think, 21 by the time we were done. Just really nerdy, min-maxy D&D stuff.
Right.
And one of the 2 bosses, the noble, I had, taken him down so we could capture him, and the cleric decided he needed to die, so he got murdered. But the cleric of the evil god that was trying to kind of kickstart some sort of low-key Armageddon, really like the Rain of Blood from L5R.
Okay, right. The blood speakers.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Jumpstart that. I'd taken him prisoner, and everyone was like, so you were going to kill him? Like, no, this is my prisoner. You all can fuck right the hell off, because you didn't do anything in this fight. I took him down by myself, and he is my prisoner, So go do whatever the shit it is you do. And Shadow Grub was like, well, I want to be a part of what's going down. It's like, all right, little homie, let's roll. And some of the things I'd prepared for this final showdown included a box of very specific dimensions. And those dimensions were the size that cleric, I actually had 2 boxes, but only one of them got used. It's the size the cleric would fit if all the joints in his body were dislocated.
That's a lot of math.
Right?
Go on.
So I proceeded to dislocate all the joints in his body and put him in a box. And I used telepathy to communicate with him while he was in this box.
Oh, Lord. This is so much worse than killing him. Go on.
Oh, you have. And I took him back to my secret lair that I had claimed in this like magical place of, artifacts from a previous age that were poorly understood. And I was doing lots of experiments on, so I was a weirdo. And my essential plan for him was to use my telepathy to convince him I was his god, never allow him enough time to pray, sleep, or ever regain his spells, torture him, mentally break him down. And I described it at great length as to what exactly I was doing to cause these things. Never, ever killing him. The torture was never particularly physical. It was all 100% psychological and deprivation related. Until he was a broken man. And then I dropped him off at the Church of the Good God with, I don't remember the god's name, doesn't matter, that I had been tithing to this entire time. That was the arch enemy of the god he followed, so they could rebuild him and rehabilitate him as a follower of his god's arch enemy and become a productive member of society and find his way there. And I watched over him periodically to come back if he ever strayed and abduct him and begin it all over again until it took. And then Shadow Grub and I, went off on our own very strange adventures.
That is messed up. I'm uncomfortable posting that, by the way. I'm going to, but I just want you to know that I think that is extremely messed up.
Well, I mean, everyone at the table, as I described in great detail, much greater than you're getting, stared in slack-jawed awe, horror, except for Rachel, who tittered gleefully next to me. And Katja eventually started laughing as well. And you could see who the bad people at the table were, because they thought this was all pretty hilarious. But everyone else just couldn't imagine how the kind of person would think of this in the first place. And then, go, yeah, I'm going to tell other people I thought this.
Yeah, I think if gaming were a little more watched and paid attention to by government agencies, you'd be on the list for possibly the BTK, right? If they didn't already catch him.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's really messed up. And I get it when you're in the escapism of gaming that you get to explore those ideas. There's a torturer in one of my books. I even write, I'm not going to tell you how to torture people. I'm not going to give you any advice here. If you really need that blow by blow.
Yeah. Well,
yada, yada, yada.
I mean, being fair, these are all things the CIA says aren't torture, so I guess it's all
dislocating
above
someone's
board
shoulders
as it is. What was that?
Dislocating somebody's shoulders and putting them in a box, that's not torture.
Well, no, that's just transportation.
I see.
It's a rough ride, right?
We had to get him to Camp X-Ray somehow.
Yeah. He was dangerous.
He was dangerous. He could have set a spell at any time.
It's true. He could have. But luckily his lungs were collapsed, so that wasn't going to happen.
Years ago, there was this very interesting conversation on EN World. I know that's hard to believe, but this was actually a really interesting conversation on EN World.
Now you're just shilling for N World.
What's that?
Now you're just shilling for N World.
Now I'm shilling because I found one interesting conversation.
Yeah.
This this game master had told a story about this paladin who had murdered somebody, and he had set up the scenario and explained to all the people reading, this is what has happened, this is why he made this decision, yada yada yada. I've already made my decision at the table. I'm just curious what everybody thinks should have happened to this paladin. And it was about murdering this Thel wizard. They're called the Thel, I think, in Forgotten Realms. I don't know the names of stuff.
Yeah, Thay. A Thay and Red Wizard of Thay.
Okay. And the paladin had him tied up. They weren't going to kill him, and he immediately starts saying something. And the paladin realized he's probably going to cast a spell. These guys are evil. He's going to hurt us. And he just slits his throat right there and kills him. And that's the setup. That's the scenario. And it led to this very, very, very long ethical and moral conversation about whether or not a paladin is allowed to do that, even in that given context. And I found it fascinating personally because everybody brought something intelligent to the conversation instead of just the standard alignment arguments that always happen. And there's something to be said for what you're talking about is at what point are you just taking a piss on what the game master has created, and at what point are you saying, this is what people who do this kind of stuff deserve?
Yeah.
And I'm not making a moral judgment, right? It's a game. You guys have your social contract. Whatever you do at your table, that's your business. But I think there's something to be said in there that worth exploring and talking about in a, not necessarily the context of this show, but somewhere online. Just what would you have done? What would you have done if you were one of the other people watching this happen, right? At what point does somebody interfere?
Yeah, get in the comments.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
So,
we've gone for over half an hour, Morgan. We don't go for a long time on these shows. I think it would be interesting to have you back, and we can talk about a different character or something else in gaming. But
sure. I
always love talking with you.
The feeling's mutual.
It's too bad you live on the other side of the planet now, and I never get to see you.
Well, I am now a New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So live free and die.
Live free and die.
If you were here, you would understand. It's not an or, it's an and.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
How often I play the game Firework or Gunshot?
Yeah, no, that's we do that in this town too. I live in Federal Way, south of Seattle, and we have daily gunfire, and the game is gunfire or fireworks.
Oh, so you're already familiar. You'd fit in just fine.